Welcome back to episode 75 of the Disorganized Wizard Club podcast. My name is Alex. I'm here with Cam.
Hey.
And we have a special guest this week, third member of the 12 Horsemen, the only member to not be on the podcast yet.
Also the only member to never drop a game.
We've got Ryan here with us today.
Hello, the undefeated.
The undefeated. Ryan, good friend of ours, friend of Adam's as well. Play a lot of team events with Adam.
Carry a lot of team events with Adam.
He's our token Storm player here in Ottawa. Ryan, really, you pretty much only play combo decks. Is that fair to say?
Whenever possible, I will also try and find the worst combo deck in Standard and just play that.
So combo decks or decks with combo elements.
Yeah, basically.
You're noted for Storm, obviously, but also Heroic, Pummeler, etc.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk a bit about combo in general today for our topic, and we thought Ryan would be a good guest to come on and teach us, give us some knowledge.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of other archetypes. We've talked a lot about Control, because Control is the best archetype, and Adam and I play it because of this. We've also talked about, we've had mid-range guests on, we've talked about aggro decks. We haven't really done a combo-focused episode.
Yeah, so we'll be getting to that a little bit later, but we're going to start, as always, with the week that was. We had a couple of team GPs across the world. One in Team Limited, Santiago. Did you see the top four for this event?
For the Team Limited?
For the Team Limited, yeah.
No.
It was won by, let me pull it up. It was the...
Paulo was in it, right?
Yeah, Paulo was in the top four with the former world champion guy, Carlos Ramao.
Oh, yeah.
And then he also had Willie Adel, Tiago Saporito, and then the three who won were Pazzo Salvato, who just won the last PT,
oh, yeah.
and Lucas Esperberto, who won PT last year.
Oh,
so like
just two PT champions. It's just stacked
kinda,
top four.
It's kind of funny. I saw a tweet from somebody talking about this top four and be like, whoever says Magic isn't a skill game is lying to themselves. Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty stacked top four.
I'll buy it
in Brazil. But we also had a team constructed in Madrid, and looking at the decks across these top fours. Have you had a chance to look at them?
No.
So
I didn't do my homework for this podcast. I'm sorry.
Top four for Standard. We had Grixis Energy took it down, then blue black mid range, blue black control, and a mono red aggro deck.
I mean, sounds like the best four decks in the format. So.
Yeah, from all the coverage I saw throughout the weekend, it felt like every Standard match I saw was just Grixis versus Grixis or blue-black versus Grixis, something like that. I think people are coming to the realization that if you're not playing Scarab God, you're doing something very, very wrong.
That and all the cards in green and white just aren't strong. There just aren't any good cards there anymore. All the very good cards from green were energy based, and they cut the legs out from those. And white just doesn't have good cards.
They're finally paying for those Siege Rhinos all those years ago.
They're paying for Siege Rhino. They're paying for Avis and Gideon, Thraben Inspector era. You know, not a good time for white.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then in the modern portion of that tournament, Grixis Death Shadow was on the first place team. Then we had a Titan Shift and two Jund decks. And Jund really, I mean, since the unbanning, Jund has just been seeing play everywhere.
Pull up that Jund list. How many Collective Brutality main? Because if it's 0, they're doing something wrong.
0. 2 in the sideboard.
At least they went up in the sideboard. We're getting closer to being right.
See this other one, though. 1 in the main, 1 in the sideboard.
They're catching on. People are finally starting to realize our smart ideas.
Yeah, and then on the legacy portion, we had colorless Eldrazi taking it down, followed by 4 color control and 2 mono red prison decks.
Just your typical brainstorm dominated format.
I mean, the 4 color control probably has some brainstorms.
Does it? Yeah, probably.
It's 4 color.
4 brainstorms.
4 brainstorms in the top 4. One for everyone.
Yeah.
Just a healthy helping of Blood Moons as well.
Yeah, so I don't know much about Legacy, so we'll glaze over that. But
Ryan plays Legacy.
What do you think of that top 4, Ryan?
The red prison deck is not very fun.
For who?
For who?
Anybody, really. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased in favor of the brainstorm decks, but it's just slamming a Trinisphere on the table. it's like a very small amount of enjoyment when you could just be casting 30 spells and killing your opponent.
I don't know. It's like that, like the American dream, sort of like the honest working man's deck, right? Like you get to go into this fancy format where everyone's casting their expensive blue spells or doing whatever, and you just have honest creatures, and you just attack your opponent.
I don't know. I'd rather just cast one spell to win the game than have to cast 30. That's just me.
Yeah, one Goblin Rabble Master, maybe a Blood Moon.
I don't know. City of Traders is pretty expensive. May not be a volcanic island, but that's getting up there these days. And I guess if Mono Red Prison's the new hot deck in the meta.
But we're not playing City of Traders. We're playing Basic Mountains.
No, you're playing City of Traders.
No. But after our Blood Moon, it's a Basic Mountain.
Well, I can't come back from that one.
Yeah, so
honest magic and legacy.
Not really surprising to see 2 Jund decks in the top 4 of this tournament. I mean, Jund before Bloodbraid was banned originally, it was always, top 8ing events. It's very consistent. It has game against pretty much everything in the format. And even its worst matchups, it can still win. And so not really surprised to see that. And then, in Standard, I mean, if you're not playing Scarab God, like I already said, you're doing something wrong. And I think everyone's slowly moving towards that. We're still seeing a pretty big variety of 5.0 lists on Moto, but I mean, it's Moto.
Yeah, people are going to try whatever.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know when the next Standard GP is, but I won't be surprised to see, something similar to what happened with the last Standard GP with just Scarab Gods littering the top 8. It's, let's touch on Standard for a little minute. So Cam and I played Standard this past Saturday at the Wizards Tower. Great sponsor of this podcast.
Hit them up for all your single needs. Free shipping in Canada.
So we played in the Standard Showdown. I played Blue-Black Midrange. Cam, you played...
I played the Red-Green Monsters list.
How'd that go for you?
I mean, the deck was fine. Like, it's a nice idea, like being able to explore away the Kenras and have them, like, to hit your land drops for your then 4, 5, and 6 drops, which are really the very powerful cards in your deck. Was good. It had more play to it than Mono Red it felt, so I enjoyed that. But it just felt so miserable trying to deal with Scarab God. Every time my opponent played a Scarab God, I just had to jump through hoops to deal with it. It was like Magma Spray plus a Braid, or hope to draw a Struggle to Survive and spend my whole turn shuffling it away. Then they can just draw it again. I think it's a good deck in the wrong format. It was fun, but I'm not going to play it again.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I played Blue-Black Midrange. I 3-0 double drew into top 4. That deck was busted. It's so good. Champion of Wits is just so much better than Whirler Virtuoso. I said it. You know heard it here first.
You know what else we said?
God.
We said that every black deck in Standard should play one or both of Glint Sleeve Siphoner and Dusk Legion Zealot. And this deck is nuts because it's playing both.
This is the version I chose to play. A lot of blue-black mid-range decks are playing Gifted Aetherborn, but I went with Dusk Legion Zealot. I got old Dusky Boy. And man, that card is great.
Yeah, cards are better than life, always.
Man, champion of Wits. Man, I want to rant about this card for a second. That card is so goddamn good. I played against Approach in round 2 or round 3 of the tournament. I drew, I think, 3 fatal pushes. Guess where they all ended up? Discarded off Champion of Wits. Man, that card's great. Just turns your dead cards in matchups into good cards. I just can't talk about how busted that card is in blue-black midrange.
Yeah, that card is sweet.
Whirler Virtuoso would not have done that.
Confirmed.
Yeah. But yeah, okay,
so on the topic of Champion of Wits, I was talking to Pete about the fact that you played this deck, and he was hesitant. He said he was hesitant to play Champion of Wits in Standard because it's just so risky if your opponent reanimates it with their Scarab God. That ever happened to you? I mean, obviously you get to reanimate it for 4 as well, but he said he didn't want to take that risk because everyone is playing Scarab God. Did you find that was an issue?
No, I did not. Then again, I think...
How many Scarab God decks did you play against?
1. 1. Yeah, I played against the Hadana's Climb Sultai Constrictor deck in round 1. Then I played against Red-White Aggro and Blue-White Approach. And then in the top 4, I played against Blue-Red Enigma Drake.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I lost.
That deck... like, okay, so the blue red Enigma Drake deck, I don't like. Obviously, it's not tier 1. It's not showing up. People like it has some consistency issues sometimes, but like it's a lot stronger than I gave it credit for at first.
Yeah.
I just find that its threats are like diverse enough that no one thing, I mean, outside of like Vraska's Contempt, really answers them. Like they have enchantments that you can't kill with sorcery speed. They have
2 mana 6/5s.
Yeah, Fatal Push is really bad against them.
Yeah.
Everything has like 4 or 5 toughness. So yeah, I also died to them because I just had Struggle Survives in my hand, and like I played against it with the red green monsters, and it wasn't good.
Yeah, no, it was pretty surprising how powerful that deck.
The Drakes get so big so fast. They're like
Yeah.
they play them on turn 3 and then they attack you for 6.
Yeah, but
You should play
overall-
that deck, Ryan. It's basically combo. It's basically Pummeler, but it's also blue and red. It's right up your alley.
I was interested. I'm surprised that the Monsters deck didn't just kind of ground pound your way through them.
How am I supposed to? I'm playing 2 1s and 2 2s on my first few turns, and they're playing a 6/4 in the air. They just get to attack me. And then they're playing dive downs. So if I ever do try to exert a Glorybringer, which is one of my only ways to kill an Enigma Drake, it just gets hexproof. And now I can't block because my dragons exerted. And I die.
Yeah, no, this deck does sound great. You've sold me on the Drakes.
Okay. You're going to come play standard?
Well, maybe.
I didn't sell you that much.
Depends if we can fit some pummelers in that deck list somewhere.
But yeah, looking at
sideboard.
the results from standard this past weekend, we were really seeing blue-black mid-range has really kind of forced itself into the top of standard when it comes to all the other decks. I mean, it has good matchups, pretty much across the board. Plays Scarab God. I mean, what more can you ask for?
Yeah. So I was thinking like about the blue-black versus Grixis sort of option. And I think maybe this is wrong. You can tell me how you felt because you didn't play against Grixis that much, but it seems like the blue-black deck is the evolution of the Grixis deck to win the mirror because it has less dead removal. It has more ways to get rid of that dead removal
Yeah.
against, other blue-black decks and Grixis decks. Whereas I was thinking about like, what have I played against locally? And I'm like, man, I like really want Harness Lightning and like a Braid against what people are doing around here. So I'm not sure which way it would go, but I'm going to try the blue-black deck.
It's tough because Grixis has the advantage of playing a card like Chandra, which you don't have access to in blue-black, which is obviously a pretty reasonable threat that has to be answered. It's not easy to have a lot of early pressure in that matchup because, both decks are filled with removal. So your Glensleeve Siphoners early are just going to die. Your 1/1 Dusk Legion Zealot isn't going to ever do anything relevant to a Chandra on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, the Grixis decks of late have just all started playing 4 Scarab Gods in their deck. I mean, all the blue-black decks are just playing 3, just mainly because of the blue-black deck gets to see more cards with your Champion of Wits.
Makes sense.
Is one of the reasons, I think. And then, but I don't really know what's favored. I'm leaning towards blue-black just because it has better cards for the matchup and less dead removal. A card like Champion of Wits goes a long way, I think, for, sculpting your hand in the matchup. But yeah, I can't really say for sure. I haven't really played the matchup, but I think both decks are a very reasonable choice.
How many Gearhulks were you playing?
2.
God, it's so few.
There's only so much room.
Yeah,
But
that's
you're also playing like blue-black also gets the advantage of playing a busted planeswalker like Liliana's Death Majesty. So you can set up draws where like you're discarding Scarab Gods off your Champion of Wits and into your turn 5 Liliana and reanimating your Scarab God. Then you have 2 massive top end threats, which is an angle that Grixis can't attack from.
That's true.
Does that more than make up for your lack of Chandra, or
See, I don't know. I really don't know.
this is the $1 million question?
Yeah. Like Chandra is obviously like incredibly good in the format right now, a really powerful planeswalker and does a lot for warping how the games play out. But I don't know. I feel like blue-black just has a few more angles of attack and its cards are just slightly better. And, you have to take into account the mana as well. Grixis mana isn't terrible, but you do have a slight of an advantage with your the blue-black deck.
Like, why aren't we just synthesizing these two decks together. Like, you're saying that you don't need Whirler Virtuoso and that you'd rather have Champion of Wits. I mean, they're both 3-drops that both decks can cast. So why don't we just put Champion of Wits in Grixis?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Why don't we? You heard it here first.
I don't know, man. But yeah, I played Grixis a bit at the beginning of this format, and from playing blue-black now, I much more enjoy playing blue-black. The deck just felt so much better across the board. Plus, you get access to something like Field of Ruin, so you don't just instantly die to a profane procession or a flip to Dawn's Climb.
That's true.
Which is a real problem.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I don't know how Grixis ever beats Profane Procession.
I don't think you can.
Counter it coming down. I guess.
I have been seeing the Hadana's Climb deck putting up more and more results online. And I mean, I played against it once, and being able to just kill that land is pretty reasonable. And we are seeing a lot more decks sideboarding cards like Bloodfast or, just lands in general. Like there's those, there's these land control decks now that are popping up. The desert decks.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, having Field of Ruin for something like an Arch of Araska.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It allows you to answer these card advantage engines that Grixis can't really deal with. But do you have anything else you want to talk about for Standard?
For Standard? No, not really. There was just the one event we played.
All right, let's talk about Modern, because there's an SCG in Dallas, and it was Modern. There's some crazy stuff going on there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you watched any of this event, but
this was the real GP, the one that wasn't a joke format.
It was taken down by Green Red Ponza. Have we ever seen Ponza win a tournament before?
Weren't we talking about how Ponza gains probably more points from Bloodbraid than Jund does?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe percentage-wise, but I still think Jund probably has about 30 points extra, for being honest.
Yeah,
I don't know, man.
Probably, but
but it's the better Bloodbraid deck. Because you don't have to like this is what Adam was saying, and that we've been discussing for a while, is that like Jund wants to be the hand disruption, like very efficient deck. And yes, Bloodbraid is very efficient, but not if you want to be playing all these hand disruption spells and like situational removal. Whereas like Ponza doesn't react to anything. It reacts to you having lands on the battlefield, but like Bloodbraid is such a proactive card.
Yeah, true. I don't know. This deck looks sweet. I think it's hilarious that it won this tournament. But we also saw 2 copies of Storm top 4 this event. And we haven't really seen Storm put up results at all since Humans kind of forced its way into the metagame with that one tournament where it like went undefeated in Swiss and then
How is the Humans
whole
versus
thing.
Jund matchup? Like, is that why Humans has fallen off?
I don't think Humans has a very good Jund matchup at all, which is probably the problem.
Yeah,
And
I mean, Jund is just full of kind of generic beaters and value cards, and they can just bolt and push all of your little dudes off the table and overrun you generally.
Okay, here's a question, Ryan. If you're playing Storm, okay, so say you're playing Modern and therefore you're playing Storm.
Crazy hypothetical.
Would you rather play against pre-Bloodbraid Jund or these new Bloodbraid versions?
The pre-Bloodbraid versions, for sure.
Really?
They're just, yeah.
But
Why-
they have more hand disruption.
Do they, though?
Yeah, people like there's been articles written about having to like cut down on hand disruption because it's a bad cascade late.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like new Bloodbraid Jund is like worse for a Storm though because they can put more pressure on you quickly.
Okay.
And like you don't need how many hand disruption spells did they cut to play Bloodbraid Elf? Like
I don't
one
know.
or 2 maybe. I don't think it's that much of a difference. You play 1 or 2 early and then you can actually pressure the Storm player as opposed to slowly grinding them out, which Jund normally does.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, like realistically, the first Thoughtseize or Inquisition against Storm is not going to win you the game. It's kind of like the second and the third one. So my thought process is, I guess even if they're playing fewer, like you're suggesting, just being able to dig deeper and maybe hit one off Bloodbraid Elf is going to hurt you a lot more. Just kind of, they get a lot more momentum through their deck.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like the the theory behind like having to go down on discard spells because you're playing Bloodbraid is that late game your opponent won't have any cards in hand, but like at any point where the game is still occurring versus Storm, they have cards in hand. So those cascades aren't bad in that matchup. Okay, that makes sense.
And I mean, if they don't have any cards in hand, then really you're not concerned anyways. So it's
or they're all on the stack.
that would be the ideal scenario.
Is Jund historically a bad matchup for Storm?
So this is actually kind of a weird, contentious topic because like the traditional knowledge or like common knowledge would suggest like, yeah, Jund just beats up Storm all the time because they can just bolt your Goblin Electromancer and disrupt your hand. But kind of in reality, it doesn't usually play out that way because Jund kind of always, they have a bunch of answers, but they're all kind of clunky in that you need the correct one at the correct moment or else it's kind of game over.
Mm-hmm.
Like against Jund, you normally have enough time that you can build up a bit of a hand. You, like I said, you don't really lose to the first or sometimes second Thoughtseize. You can just kind of fill your graveyard more. And then you kind of have to force them to answer the question all at once where it's like, can you kill this goblin right now? Otherwise, we're kind of off to the races.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So I think it's I'm not really surprised to see Storm kind of putting 2 copies in the top 4 of this event, seeing how we've kind of come to the conclusion that Jund is probably pushing humans out of the format.
Yeah. Sorry, I got distracted because as you mentioned that Jund was pushing humans out of the format, one of your roommates was a human pushing pots and pans out of the cupboard. And there was this like cacophonous clatter coming from the kitchen.
I'm clearly not a professional podcaster, but I wasn't sure if we were going to address that or not.
Oh, no, man. It's freeform here.
There is one other deck I want to talk about in this top 4 that we haven't seen really put up any results at all, which is the Infect deck.
Oh, yeah. That deck like stopped existing.
Yeah.
In fact, also sweet combo deck.
Like, why do we think that this deck all of a sudden kind of poked its way through? Or is this just kind of how Modern's working?
Here's why Infect did well at this tournament. This tournament is right in sort of the sweet spot between the accidental Dominaria spoilers and when Dominaria comes out in a month. So WotC paid all the judges to ban and disqualify or for whatever reason punish all of this guy's opponents so that Infect seems to be making a resurgence before Phyrexia comes back in the Dominaria story.
That's real deep conspiracy, man.
It does also kind of make sense because Infect actually has a bad Jund matchup. So, of course, it should have a resurgence. I mean, why
Infect
not?
has a bad Jund matchup?
Oh, yeah.
But there's a lot of Jund.
Yeah, that was the joke. Is
Oh.
your conspiracy theory is,
Right, this would have to be. Oh, yeah, I see. My conspiracy theory would have to be true. Otherwise, in a Jund-filled... Yeah, okay.
I'm enjoying my last podcast.
I don't know. I kind of think this guy slipping into top 4 here is probably just the result of Modern being the wacky, crazy format it is, and it's super possible you just get all good matchups all the way through the event because the format's so open.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they just dodged a bunch of Jund decks. I mean, it's super possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the deck looks pretty normal for an Infect deck.
He doesn't even have the Regenerate Snake Infect guy to kind of somewhat help against Jund.
Yeah. I don't know, man. But anyway, there is a crazy deck, though, that kind of popped onto the scene here. We were seeing kind of versions of it 5-0ing on Moto, but... it finished in 15th in this event. This 4-color Pyromancer deck. Did you see this deck at all?
No.
No.
I assume it's just an update of the Mardu version?
So, yeah, it's Bedlam Reveler, Pyromancer, but it's also playing green for Bloodbraid Elf, Grimflare, and Traverse.
This seems... It's like on the surface it seems scattered, but...
Man, this
like
deck is wild.
The only thing that's not good to cascade into because you can't is Reveler, but like
Mishra's Bauble not.
Mishra Bauble also not great to cascade, but like just put strong creatures in your deck and play a Traverse package.
And yeah, I love the Traverse package. That's awesome. We've been seeing a few kind of versions of this deck popping out. Some Reveler decks are now moving to Death Shadow as well as another win condition. Just cheap threat that can.
Oh, they're playing Lingering Souls.
Yeah.
This is the Lingering Souls Bloodbraid deck. All right.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah. I don't know. This deck looks awesome. I love it.
I was wondering kind of how long this would take because, like, they unbanned Bloodbraid and everyone just all anybody talked about or played or worked on was Bloodbraid Jund. It's like people couldn't forget that Bloodbraid wasn't in Jund. There's other colors. There's other decks. Like, it's green-red. You can play it with other things.
True.
So I'm glad that Ponza did well and that this deck showed up.
Have you ever cascaded into a Loxodon Smiter?
I have not, no.
Now that's a combo I can endorse.
What was Adam going to play?
Blue-white control.
No. He was going to play Bloodbraid Elves cascading into Woolly Thoctars.
Yeah. Just playing as big dumb idiots.
Just play some Naya Zoo.
All right. I think that's all I wanted to talk about for this event. So let's move on to combo. Building off of these two Storm decks doing so well in Dallas. So let's get some input from Ryan here. What do you want to talk about for combo today?
All right, the first thing I wanted to ask, because I haven't really spent a lot of time playing a combo deck, being devoted to playing a combo deck in a format. And Ryan has, and he's also watched a lot of other people try and play combo decks. So I kind of wanted to ask, what are the common mistakes, common pitfalls that people make when they pick up combo decks, maybe Storm, maybe whatever else, that you would, suggest avoiding?
So we're talking a bit about this, and just I think the biggest thing to remember is that combo kind of draws a lot of parallels to control decks if you're normally a control player, where your highest win percentage plays are going to come down to timing and knowing the format. So when I'm playing Storm, the only real things I'm concerned about is how fast can my opponent kill me and how fast can they get online to be able to efficiently stop me. Sometimes for Jund, that's kind of getting to the point where they can cast 2 interactive spells in a turn. Or against a control deck, it's how bad is it if I wait until they have Cryptic Command mana? Can I, or if that's the case, can I give them Cryptic Command and then use that to hopefully try and set up for something else later? And then obviously there's just the mono reds and the zoos and the kind of faster combo decks where you need to be very precisely aware of what their kind of kill potential is each and every turn. Because kind of how you want to save your removal for the kind of last possible moment in a control deck, in combo, you basically want to save everything for the last possible second, where you want to be able to maximize the number of cards you see, kind of your setup, your mana, and kind of the information you can get from seeing how your opponent plays.
So it's just timing sensitive, really.
That is the biggest thing. It's kind of to make a poker analogy, you need to be able to know when the best time to all in is, or that's not really a poker analogy. That's just
good advice.
Yeah. It's all about picking your spots, and that is basically the only important thing. People will kind of joke about how Storm is non-interactive, but just because the cards don't exactly bump up and send each other to the graveyard all the time, it's super interactive in terms of how you have to play with and against your opponent.
So the interaction is how the Storm player sets up the non-interactive turn.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, it's not really the whole, I'm just goldfishing while my opponent does whatever they do, which is kind of the general thought, I would say, from a lot of people when it comes to playing Storm.
Yeah, or it's sometimes you'll just kind of see people have bad beat stories where they're oh, my opponent just had a counter spell and the exact time they needed it. And then you kind of reflect back on that game and they're well, they had 4 cards in hands and they missed their land drop. They just pass a turn. Obviously, something's going on there. You kind of have to be able to read your opponent in terms of when they're not choosing to interact with you or not trying to do anything, and kind of understand oh, maybe I also just play a land and say go this turn instead of trying to go for the air quotes turn 4 kill that everybody talks about in Modern.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question, and I think I know the answer, but that idea when like, oh, my opponent just missed their land drop and didn't do anything, or maybe they've only been playing lands and not doing anything, like people will sometimes think, oh, maybe they have a counter spell, or how bad is it if they have a removal spell for this? Like, how bad is it if I get blown out here? And then sometimes people, they'll go for it anyway. Their whatever threat will get countered, and they'll be like, you had it, and then the game continues because it's kind of like a mid-range deck, and you draw a few more cards. You're a bit behind, but you can do something else. However, I feel like trying to go for it in that scenario, like getting one of your key pieces countered or like getting quote unquote blown out like that is much more punishing to combo decks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like if again, when kind of we look at the storm lists that top four that event, it's like you're only playing six or seven. Nobody's playing 8 anymore of your kind of Electromancer Baral effects, right? Like, and you need one of them. So you really only get so many kind of runs at it over the course of a game. Now, like, it's all kind of context dependent, where if you have 2, you can kind of try and bait one out. Like if, for example, you're against Jund, you have 2 dudes in your hand, you can kind of play one on turn 2 or 3, and then if it survives, then you're like, all right, sweet. We basically just...
This game's over. Yeah.
This game's over. But if they kind of like kill it instantly, then you know that... maybe we don't just run out the next one and be like, what's the chance he has 2 removal spells? Like, you can't actually take that risk, because if they do have 2 removal spells, you just lose the game.
That makes sense. So I can see why that would be like a common mistake a lot of people make, because you can get away with more of those risks in pretty much every other deck. And so I could see myself getting there and like convincing myself that like, oh, I need one of these to go off and I want to go off next turn, so I'm just going to play it and how lucky my opponent is.
Yeah, I mean, like, you do kind of get to set yourself up for those where it's like, what's the chance he has a third? Like, basically any sort of oddball scenario that you can kind of paint this picture in your head. But if you want to be playing your best and you want to be getting the most percentage points out of every game, you really do have to be thinking about like, well, this play is actually very bad, because if it doesn't work, I just lose. Like, on the flip side, though, you do need to also realize, like, well, if he has a third removal spell, I just can't win the game going long anyways. So, like, obviously it's kind of tricky in that regard, but just always kind of forcing them to have it is not good, because sometimes they do, and you just lose those games that you maybe could have won by playing patiently or just waiting.
That makes sense. So, yeah, it's sort of a patience thing, making sure to pick your spot. There was a thing you were talking about. We were looking at some of these storm lists that top forward, and you brought up the point that they swapped out their fetch lands for Shivan Reefs.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of the latest tech, if you will, because, like, modern decks don't really change very much. But this was something that Caleb Scherer, who top forward the event, kind of started doing on Moto, and people originally just saw his list and were like, oh, this is a budget thing, and then started to realize, like, no, this is like a known player. He could be doing this. Like, why is this guy running Shivan Reefs instead of the fetch lands? And the reason is, since Opt entered Modern, a lot of these storm decks are playing kind of fewer lands, fewer actual combo pieces, and they're playing just anywhere from 10 to 12 cantrips. And between Serum Visions, Opt, and Sleight of Hand, all of those will send the cards you don't want to the bottom of your library. So I guess what Caleb figured out, and this isn't like a unanimously adopted thing in the kind of Storm community, if you will, but the idea is that you just can send those cards to the bottom of your deck, and if you never shuffle, you never see them again, and that's just going to give you a higher percentage to like draw the cards you actually want off the top. The kind of caveat that I should mention is, yes, you do shuffle when you cast Gifts Ungiven, but if you cast Gifts Ungiven, it doesn't matter. So
you're probably winning if you're casting Gifts Ungiven.
Yeah, I kind of went through that same thought process. And I'm like, oh, but you just cast Gifts Ungiven and then shuffle, and it doesn't, like, all of this work just for nothing. And then you kind of stop and think, like, no, actually,
yeah,
you're just going to win.
Yeah. Okay. When it comes to other cards, when we're talking about card selection in these decks, is there really much of a difference, or what are considerations when you're going to play Storm in a tournament? Like, is there a specific 75 that's generally considered a lock, or what are the fringe cards you might play for one weekend, or what are some flex slots, you could say, in the main deck.
So the 75 is kind of far from locked, but the 58 pretty much is. You kind of see people playing Unsubstantiate for a main deck answer. You can see people playing an extra Goblin or like a Noxious Revival type effect. Some people just kind of give themselves outs in the main deck. It used to be that we were playing one Empty the Warrens main deck, but just extra grape shots have kind of pushed that out. And then I guess obviously it's a modern deck, so a lot of your preparation and what actually changes from tournament to tournament is your sideboard. And there's like just a lot of bad ideas you can have. I mentioned this to Cam last night that I could just bring in all of the ridiculous sideboards I've registered. Like, Pieces of the Puzzle is a limited all-star, which it's not, but actually is very, very good against Jund. And that's why actually one of the top 4 decks at Star City was running 4, is it just kind of almost acts as a second Gifts Ungiven, in that you can just kind of refill your hand and really up the number of interactive spells they need for you. And from there, the only real locks you have in your sideboard are your white ley lines, just because some combo decks are just faster than you, and it's just kind of an auto win against a lot of the kind of hand disruption and just burn
You
decks.
say that, but neither
I'm
of
not
these
seeing
decks
any.
are playing Leyline.
Wow, they must have been really lucky.
I don't know. Like what I'm seeing, both decks are playing Pyromancer's Ascension. Both are playing Pieces of the Puzzle, and then you have your bolts. There's Echoing Truth. There's Wipeaways. But we see a card like Giga Drowse in one, not in the other. Empty the Warrens as well. Both decks playing 2.
Yeah, so you're always going to want at least 2 empties in your sideboard, and you will normally almost always bring one in. It's very much like a not game 1, always game 2 kind of card, in case, because it just kind of requires a different set of hate spells from your opponent. 2 Blood Moons is also fairly standard. It's just like something you can ramp out on turn 2 and just kind of get some points that way. No white ley lines is actually pretty surprising, but I guess the Pyromancer's Ascensions kind of fill that role, not in the sense that they can like lock out the burn in the combo decks, but against Jund especially, like if they're going to be discarding and filling your graveyard, that's kind of like a cheeky secondary way to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And one kind of cute thing that I really like about Storm decks is if you're not running the Noxious Revival in the main deck, you will almost always see that plus Wipeaway and Echoing Truth in the sideboard, at least as one ofs. Because if your opponent has like a permanent hate card on it, you can gifts for the package of Wipeaway, Echoing Truths, and Noxious Revival, and you are guaranteed to at least get one piece of interaction that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a weird collection of cards, but when you are thinking about building your deck in your sideboard in the context of Gifts Ungiven, it's actually pretty sweet.
Yeah, I guess it does. These the one Wipeaway, the one Giga Drowse, the one Shattering Spree, these cards kind of make a lot more sense as one-offs when you're playing Gifts Ungiven in your deck.
Oh yeah, and it also kind of helps address Storm and like combo decks' main problem as a whole, where sideboarding is often a trap in that you need the core of your deck to remain intact. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're just not going to do the thing that you have specifically built your deck to do.
That's what I was going to ask, because like the combo decks that I have experience with are like Saheeli combo from Standard, or I played Twin a couple times in Modern. And there are matchups where you can just become a control deck and you can board out your 8 max combo pieces because it's this combo you've put in a tempo shell. This, like Storm, you can't board out Storm.
Yeah.
So like in these dedicated combo decks, like you can't, if you're playing Pummeler, you can't board out Pummelers. You maybe can attack them with Hydras or something, but like your entire deck is built towards doing this one thing, not being disruptive and then comboing as a finish. So with these types of decks, yeah, it's like as you were saying, there doesn't seem to be a lot of slots for sideboarding. So like which cards can come out? I mean, obviously it's matchup dependent, but
yeah, I mean, to touch on Storm in a second. It's actually an interesting point that you bring up, in that kind of combo gets like the overall title, but there are actually a lot of variation in combo decks where you get kind of the engine combo decks, like your Storms, your Adnas, and Eggs before it was banned.
Ironworks.
Yeah, like those kind of where your
count it
combo
out, man.
is actually just like your entire deck. Whereas you'd also just have like A plus B combo decks, like your Splinter Twin, your Show and Tells, where you are like a combo in air quotes deck, but really you're definitely skewing far more to the control side of that spectrum.
Yeah, those are like, I feel like Twin, like it's not great if Twin goes for it and gets blown out, but they can play out of that. Those are the decks that like,
Yeah,
if you think
Twin doesn't need Splinter Twin to win a lot of the time. Like what this is when it was in the format, but you saw lots of games just beating down with Exarchs and Pestermites and just tempoing your opponent out of the game.
Bolt snap bolt you.
Yeah, yeah, like
and those decks gain points from people being scared of the combo, people having to respect that you could just combo. Where
exactly, yeah.
I feel like people, I mean, they have to respect that Storm could go off, but like in a different way. There's nothing else for them to worry about.
That's true. But kind of on the flip side is like they are always scared. Kind of if we were talking before about how like as a Storm player you can just kind of go for it and kind of tell yourself the narrative of like, oh, if he doesn't have a removal spell, I win. And you can kind of do that as a mid-range player against like a plus B combo deck where it's like, I'm just going to cast my Tarmogoyf this turn, and if they don't kill me next turn, I'm going to never tap out again and just be in great shape. So it kind of like flips the roles in that sense. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure where that was going to go.
No, that's a good point. About like we're talking about combo and how to play combo, but playing against combo decks. If you are playing against this deck where 50 of its cards are dedicated to one combo, they are pretty likely to have some of their combo cards in hand, and so you can't take these turns of like. My example from Standard was Mardu versus Saheeli, where Mardu was just like, I'm going to tap out for Gideon this turn, and then if I untap, I'll be in a good position. I can start pressuring you. Whereas, like, it seems what your point is that against Storm or Adnaz or these like dedicated decks, if they're in a scenario where they could maybe go off and you tap out, they're gonna go off. So like, you always have to be respecting it.
That is definitely where I was going. It's just like, actually though, like,
Yeah,
you can't really just here's my Tarmogoyf against Storm because they're probably just going to kill you. Like, you do have to give them a lot more respect than kind of your Splinter Twins or your Show and Tells of the world.
Is there any threat that you think it's worth your opponent tapping out for in Modern?
I mean, that is kind of an interesting question from a Storm player's perspective because
Thalia.
Thalia, Meddling Mage.
I mean, there are decks that, their only interaction is putting stuff on the board, so sure.
Yeah, but like, I know what you mean. It's really does kind of come down to, I guess, in a control deck, because really everybody's a control deck against combo, if you kind of want to think about it that way. So as the control player, in air quotes, you really do just have to think about kind of, can my opponent kill me? Like, and then a lot of that's format knowledge and knowing what deck you're playing against. Like, if your Storm opponent has kind of 3 lands going into turn 4 and hasn't played a dude yet, then they like with 2 or 3 cantrips cast, they can probably kill you if you tap out for your Geist. But on turn 2, if they haven't played anything, like just as a general rule, Storm can't really kill you on turn 3 without a guy in play from turn 2, unless they have a perfect 7-card hand. Like, that's just not going to happen. So in that scenario, yeah, you can play your Tarmogoyf. But it kind of does put the onus on you in terms of you need to know what the Storm deck is capable of, what the requirements for to kill you are, and kind of how confident has your opponent been, I guess, in a way, with their cantrips. Like, have they been cantripping a lot? That's not a good sign. Have they only cast 1 cantrip on turn 1 and then just kind of hemmed and hawed on turn 2? That type of thing is, you do really just kind of have to read your opponent a lot more in these types of scenarios.
That makes sense. It's just, you were saying it's timing from the combo player's point of view, but it's really just a timing dependent matchup for everybody sitting at the table.
Right. Like both players need to be very conscious and very aware of the fact that like this is all basically going to end on one turn. And yeah, people can kind of get a sour taste in their mouth where like they say, oh, this deck is interactive. I only got to cast one spell, but that's kind of the intriguing part and like the fun part as a combo player is like, yeah, we're not going to be playing for very many turns. There's only a set amount of game actions that are going to take place, and each one of them is super important.
That's like the fact that it's forces your opponent's deck to be aware of timings is also really interesting because a lot of like deck building wisdom is play cards that are good early, good late, play cards that are fine on turn 2, but are also good top decks. And a lot of people, because of this, might have just, they might have in their mind that Goyf is good, Bolt is good, whatever, and not have spent some time to think about like, all right, but when is Goyf good against combo? Because they just have these like, oh, it's a strong card, but you need to like step back and analyze like the timing aspects of these cards that you thought were time independent.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where just all of your percentage points in the matchups come from. Like, I remember I played a game against a Death Shadow deck, which kind of just did its regular Death Shadow thing and like made me discard a bunch of cards and just made a giant Death Shadow. But then come turn 4 or 5, I was just able to kill them with like 2 rituals and 2 grape shots because they did their Death Shadow thing. They kind of stripped my hand apart, sure, but at that point they brought their life total so low that my base to kill was also super, super low. Like I just needed to like string very few number of spells together in order to actually kind of get a kill. So yeah, you do have to kind of be very aware of just like what you're playing is, and sometimes that's going to make your deck do awkward stuff, and it kind of sucks, but you're going to have to deal with it. Like you're not going to be able to play your Geist of St. Draft on turn 3. Like, sorry.
Oh, but I wanna.
No one plays that card anyway, so. Wrapping this all up, do you, like seeing that Storm, put 2 copies in a top 4, do you actually think it is a good choice in Modern going forward? Or are these results kind of just, the typical Modern thing that happens? Sometimes these decks just do really good because they get good pairings or...
I mean, I think it's a little bit of a cop-out to just kind of chalk it up to pairings. But at the same time, it's true. Like, Modern's gonna Modern, right?
Yeah.
Like, the best deck to play is always the one nobody thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's Boggles like the past few weeks or kind of Storm because you feel you get to read the like Graveyard Hate's going to be low or people are going to be junding and not really worrying about Cryptic Commands or Mana Leaks, that kind of thing, is like you need to know kind of both what people are going to be bringing against you and also just obviously be able to play the deck well enough that those percentage points matter. Like,
Yeah.
you can have all the metagaming you want in Modern, but if you're losing enough points on your play, then really that doesn't matter.
One more thing. Are you worried about that new Dominaria artifact that just hoses Tron and Storm?
I don't acknowledge its existence.
Hasn't been printed. Hasn't been officially spoiled yet.
Yeah, there you go. That's also pretty key to combo is if you don't like something, just do your thing. Hope nobody's playing that card.
That's actually something, that was a huge thing that happened this last week that we just didn't mention is the Dominaria leaks.
Yeah, whole bunch of them.
Yeah, they were first leaked in Chinese, and then WotC acknowledged the leak and leaked the equivalent information translated accurately in English. So there's a bunch of cards up now. I know various spoiler sites have them up with like art placeholders.
Yeah, and then we did see one actual card. They spoiled Phyrexian Scriptures.
Right.
So we could see
one
what
of the sagas.
The sagas actually
Which
look
Ryan has a strong opinion about.
I'm just an old man. I like my Magic cards to have a picture on top and words on the bottom.
So yeah, if you haven't seen them, sagas, it's essentially a full art card, but the text is going down the left side of the art. All the way
It's
down.
still like a half art card. They just rearranged it. Yeah, there's text on the left, art on the right.
I don't know, I think it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks like a scroll.
Yeah. That card too does seem pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They reprinted Damnation basically. It's a 4-mana Wrath.
Yeah. But anyway, we can wrap this things up. We have a blowout of the week this week, not Magic related, but involves Adam over in China,
Yeah, so Adam isn't here. Well,
obviously.
yeah, obviously, because he would not be able to keep quiet enough. Yeah, so he traveled to China, and as Ryan was telling us, his first mistake was taking a checked bag.
Never bring a checked bag.
Ever, like, you would recommend never doing it on international flights?
If you have a connection, just don't do it.
But he did have a connection. He had multiple connections, and he took a checked bag. And so when he got to Beijing, they had lost his bag.
Of course.
So he had to, like, what happened? He was waiting at the airport to see if his bag would get there in time, and then it wasn't there in time, and so he either missed his next flight or missed the timing for them to put his bag on the next flight, so he also skipped it. Had to spend an extra night in Beijing just waiting and like rebooking flights before finally getting to where he was going.
Man.
But did he get his bag in the end?
He did get his bag in the end, but after he got his bag, it was too late to put his current bag on the next flight. And just classic blowout.
It's just stuck in Beijing for an evening.
Oh, man. All right. So thank you all for joining the club this week. Make sure, as always, you check out wizardtower.com for all your Magic single needs. This weekend, Masters 25 drafts, Masters 25 release.
Oh, yeah, starting on Friday, right?
Yeah. So I think Tower's running $35 drafts with prizes as store credit and packs. So
and packs.
I definitely think it's the best place in the city if you want to be drafting this set.
$35 is not too bad for a Jace.
And as always, however you listen to this podcast, whether it's on Podbean, iTunes, or your podcast app, leave us a review, rate the podcast, share it with your friends. Everything helps the podcast grow. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook, the Disorganized Wizards Club Podcast. We're also on Twitter at DWC Podcast 1. Shoot us a message. We always like hearing from people. If you have something we talked about on the show that you want a little more clarification, we're more than willing to answer you. If there's anything in particular you want us to talk about, definitely let us know. And we generally talk about everything that people send us. And thanks again to Ryan for coming on the show this week.
You did kind of say that I'm only here because Adam's not, but
I mean,
that's the only reason we ever bring on guests is because someone's gone.
Well, you didn't have to say it. You could have kept it special.
No, we value your appearance. We really wanted you here. You know, we kept making the joke that it was foretold the last of the 12 Forestmen would arrive and the apocalypse would begin.
It is snowing a lot. It hasn't stopped.
You could say it's storming.
All right, we'll see y'all next week.